Hello. So in this Mad Hatter Day video for 2025, we're going to talk about Dennis Devine's film Alice in Murderland. Now, this is a low-budget indie horror film inspired, sort of, by Alice in Wonderland. The storyline doesn't really follow Lewis Carroll's novel, but the references are so heavy-handed as to be clumsy. A part of that is it's an indie film, and sometimes the writing and acting and special effects and whatnots in indie films are not amazing, and this is not an exception, unfortunately. So, the basic premise of Alice in Murderland is this group of sorority sisters is going to celebrate the 21st birthday of Alice Lewis. And to do this, they decide to have an Alice in Wonderland themed party with no boys allowed. Mostly because there is concern that one of the sorority sisters, Tiffany, who's really terrible, will invite Alice's ex-boyfriend, whom Tiffany is now dating. They also make a rule that no cell phones are going to be allowed, which is slightly an odd rule and seems largely to be a contrivance so that later on, when things go sideways, no one can call for help. In fairness, this film came out in 2010, so cell phone technology was not quite as advanced as it is today, but still. So not only do they decide that they're going to have this party with no boys and no cell phones, it's an Alice in Wonderland themed party, so everyone has to dress up as a character from Alice in Wonderland, seemingly with Mallory White, Alice's best friend, assigning people their roles. They're also going to have this in the glass house. Charlene Glass seemed to have been some sort of, I don't know, punk rock person about 21 years earlier. And in this house, Alice's mother, Anne Lewis, was brutally and seemingly pointlessly murdered on her 21st birthday. So, the sorority sisters, whom we never actually see doing anything like university-related or even seemingly like, I don't know, I mean, I guess we see them in what could possibly, by some stretch of the imagination, be a sorority house, but, like, they decide that they are going to have a party for their friend in the place and on the anniversary where her mother was murdered. Her father was never seen again after that. That seems less like a concern for anybody, apart from the fact that it does lead to speculation that he may have murdered Anne and then run off, or he may have been murdered with Anne and his body was just never found. So there's speculation about what happened. There's also speculation about whether or not Charlene Glass was involved, or whether it was someone else, because she was never seen again after this either. So, why do they do this? Why do they choose to have this party in the place and on the anniversary of her mother's murder, that's not really explained, apart from the fact that Renee White, who is Mallory White's uncle, so Alice's best friend's uncle, he has just bought the glass house. And he's going to fix it up into some kind of like multi-purpose space. Possibly he's going to live in the loft, and he's building a theater space where they can do plays and things like that. So, it's a weird sort of deal. That does not seem to be a great reason to have this party for Alice in the place and on the anniversary of where her mother was murdered, but they do it anyway. And after they sort of decide that, no one is ever really like, maybe this is actually not a great thing. Maybe this is not super sensitive to our friend who is who seems to have lived with this trauma her entire life and never really come to terms with it. So there's that element of it. We know, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that this is the place where Anne was murdered and that this is the anniversary of her murder, because it's mentioned about 47 times in the film. So the film has, I think, an hour and 20-something minute runtime, so it's not a massively long film. And Alice says multiple times, "My mother was murdered, and I don't know what happened." Mallory explains to the rest of the sorority sisters, seemingly 3 or 4 times, that this is the place where Alice's mother was killed. Nobody knows what happened. Here's some of the common speculation. At one point, they have a whole extended discussion about what happened to Alice's father. Who was it that killed Alice's mother? What happened to Charlene Glass? And they have that whole conversation with Alice just sitting right there. They also have that conversation a couple other times, I think, with Alice not usually there. So we get the same information over and over and over again. We also have a character named Pima, who's a chemistry major, who has become a chemistry major because she wants to better understand the chemical impacts of drugs, because she likes drugs. And about 65% of her dialogue is basically just asking if anybody wants mushrooms. She literally says the word mushrooms about 70 times, or shrooms about 70 times. It's so much, so much for a movie this length. So that's really the most infuriating thing about Alice in Murderland, is it's incredibly fucking repetitive. So they're there at this party, and even actually before the party, a guy named Andrew gets murdered in the glass house because he, I guess, is mad that they aren't inviting him, so he's come in to set up traps for the girls. He's like broken into this place to set pranks, one of which seems to be a bear trap, which is actually not really a good prank. But like, he gets hacked to death with an axe, I believe. Matt, who is Alice's ex-boyfriend who's now dating Tiffany, he comes in at one point because Tiffany basically ordered him to. He leaves after they get caught by Alice, and he gets hacked to death. And then over the course of the latter portion of the movie, the girls start getting murdered by this person, initially just sort of dressed in a black robe, but then subsequently dressed as the Jabberwocky, which is, of course, the dragon from Alice Through the Looking Glass. They get killed in various ways, many of which are quite consistent with low-budget slasher films. We have a lot of sort of switching back and forth between the killer sort of going like this, whether it's an axe, a machete, a knife, whatever it is. The knife is slightly, I guess, more like that, but the same basic thing. And then the person ostensibly being hit by that bladed weapon repeatedly, just sort of screaming and slowly falling over. While tons of fake blood gushes everywhere. Including in splatter patterns that seem inconsistent with the type of wounds being inflicted. But again, low-budget indie horror, so what are you going to do? The murders are not especially terrifying, in part because, again, there's that sort of campy element to low-budget, cheesy horror murders, where it's like, okay, this hasn't convinced me that this is a real murder. I'm not scared of this. I'm not sort of terrified for my life. And I don't begrudge them that, right? Like, that's a low budget issue that you deal with that. And I actually don't, it's not a problem, right? You suspend your disbelief to sort of accept, all right, this person has been killed, without it sort of feeling real necessarily. But, again, you accept that as a person who watches a low-budget horror movie. What I do actually kind of like about the film. Oh, so the other thing I'll mention, the explanation for why the killer is killing and why the killer is specifically targeting Alice last doesn't make that much sense. We find out that Kat, one of the sorority sisters, is the daughter of Charlene Glass, and then we subsequently find out that Samantha, one of the other sorority sisters, is the other daughter of Charlene Glass. And basically the explanation for why Kat and Samantha go on a killing spree is their mother was homicidally insane, and so they are too. And for some reason that's not really made clear, Anne Lewis triggered Charlene to fly into a homicidal rage, and so Alice Lewis triggers Kat to fly into a homicidal rage. Why? Don't really know. It's not explained in that much depth. It seems like a somewhat contrived premise. So, all of those criticisms out of the way, I do have one thing that I do kind of like about this film, which is that it uses this blend of sort of flashbacks and dream sequences, hallucinogenic nightmares, etc., which raises some interesting questions about the nature of reality and what information can be trusted. And this actually fits really, really well with Alice in Wonderland, because so much of the Lewis Carroll novels are about the problem of knowledge, the problem of certainty, the problem of consistency, etc., in a world where we are all mad here, right? In a world where you cannot necessarily trust that anything that you are seeing, anything you are experiencing, even anything that you are thinking is objectively real. And so the use of dream sequences in which, for instance, Alice dreams her mother's murder, or Dee, a character named Dee, who's good friends with Donna. Dee dreams the Mad Hatter, who is Renee White's character in the party. Dee dreams that the Mad Hatter is murdering herself and Donna. We have these hallucinations. Dee has a bad shrooms trip and freaks out and thinks that the Mad Hatter is coming for her and starts like strangling those around her, thinking that they're the Mad Hatter. And then we've got these flashbacks to the fate of Anne Lewis and Charlene Glass. And we don't necessarily know what's trustworthy or not. And so it raises these interesting sort of questions about ontological certainty and our ability to know what is true in a world where the senses can be deceived. And so thematically, I actually think there is that really interesting connection with the original Alice stories, even though the plot of Alice in Murderland is very, very different from the plot of the Alice in Wonderland stories by Lewis Carroll.